Good. Okay. Well, I think we'll make a start. So once again, welcome to this FAQs live special event. My name's Duncan. I'm head of training here at Agility and Mind, and I'm very happy to be joined by Michael here from Scaled Agile. Michael, would you like to say a quick hello, introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Agility IM, for inviting me. Pleasure being here and have a great discussion and answer possible questions from the attendees. So thank you.
Great stuff. So just one thing to note, so the session is being recorded so that everybody is aware, and we're here today to talk about the use of SAFe and how SAFe might be appropriate for ambitious SMEs, small medium enterprises. And this is the program that we're going to run with today. We're first of all going to frame up the problem. We'll talk about some of the growing pains which you might experience going from startup into sort of larger organizations and then beyond that. Perhaps me and Michael might share some examples, some scenarios that we've seen before. Then we'll have a chance for questions on that. And then the last part of the session will be essentially on the solution to that, or a potential solution to that. How can you channel that creative energy that you get in a startup without losing that innovation, that sort of spark, but nonetheless channeling it in the right direction so that people are not going off in different directions. Then, of course, after that, there will be once again a time for some Q&A. So let's start by framing up the problem. What are the typical growing pains that you might see going from a small startup business to a larger organization? Right at the start, things tend to be pretty straightforward. You know, you've got this great idea, 2, 3, 4 people maybe are sort of working together. It's all quite fluid. It's all quite, I've got a great idea. All right, I'll help you out with that. What do we need to do? Well, I'll do a bit of this. I'll do a bit of that. In a startup, I think the old adage is everybody does everything. Is something needs to be done. Okay, let's all sort of pitch in and work out how it goes. If it does work, of course, not all startups make it beyond that stage. I've got a great idea. Turns out it wasn't such a great idea after all. But if you do make it to that next stage, things then start to grow. Another idea comes through. You're going to build out the teams. You're going to have different sort of people doing different things. It can get to a stage perhaps where in that startup idea, you're growing, you're sort of having maybe sort of different teams growing in different directions. There are now people specializing in certain things. And this is the stage where that initial, I guess, fluidness can create difficulties. Ideas maybe well be sort of coming out. There might be other teams that are maybe not as connected with those founding sort of people that were part of the organization at the start. The founders are still quite keen to do things in a very dynamic way. They got where they are today by getting things done and just doing things. And, they're quite keen to maybe carry on in that idea. Meanwhile, other parts of the organization might be struggling. People might need some help, but the help is not forthcoming and it can create difficulties. So these are the sorts of growing pains which you might expect to see as an organization grows. And this is the challenge that we're here to talk about today. Michael, does that resonate with any of the clients you've worked with in the past?
No, of course. And so before joining also large organizations from a consultancy perspective, but also from an internal perspective, which is different, definitely. I've been involved in many initiatives or many startups, if you want, from very small to large, if you want, in their first stage. And I have to say that the 3 things I have always seen happening, unfortunately, are the following. So the first one is being busy. So working 15 hours a day doesn't give you the key to success. So the problem I've seen in many startups, also the one I've been just watching or just collaborating with, not my own one, so to speak, just people busy doing things, but not really focusing on building the right thing, right? So, and also in some cases don't have really the customer focus that should be there and should be fostered. The other problem was alignment. Also, kind of course, everybody is talent on a startup, especially the beginning, if you want. Everybody's doing everything, as you said. The problem is everybody or everyone has great ideas, and communicating this or having the people aligned around these ideas is also a challenge. So you might be looking into the future and you might have a clear vision, but it's very difficult, at least in my experience, especially in startups, to communicate to also some of having the people on board in terms of being engaged as well, right? I'm not saying about the startup itself, but about different features or different things that you want to achieve. And the third one, which is pretty much related with the first two, is prioritization. So where do we start? So what is going to help us to grow faster? What is going to help us in build the right infrastructure as well, and architecture? This is another topic we can probably cover a little bit later. But let's say these are the three main elements I have seen in recurring in my past experience, if you want.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that first point in particular resonates with me. You know, I think the ethos of a startup, and if you are one of the founders, maybe you're in that sort of first early sort of team, probably there is a need to, you know, just dedicate your entire life to it, work 15 hours, get things done. One of the patterns I've seen is sometimes there then can be a bit of a clash of cultures between those first half dozen people. And when you get to maybe 100 people, 200, 500 people in an organization, the new hires who are maybe more accustomed to working in a more corporate environment where they're sort of thinking about a nice 40-hour week and having work-life balance and not, you know, maybe, you know, it's a different mindset, I think, isn't it? If you're a founder, you're absolutely passionate about it. You're throwing your entire life into it. Whereas if you're a member of staff, it's a way of paying the mortgage. It's a way, you know, but also you want to still have a life. You want to do the other things that you're involved with. So there can be a bit of a culture clash, I think, in that sort of way. There can be frustration on both sides arising from different expectations and different approaches.
Yeah, and in some cases, this happened to me once. I was sitting in the board of one of the startup I was working with, and we had an issue. Was a startup in the travel industry, and we had a discussion around customers and struggling in a given market to enter. And one of the founders said, "So customers are not or they are not understanding what we are doing. They are stupid." And that brings me to think, really, customers stupid? Are we serious now? So sometimes also, and I've seen these only a couple of times, fortunately, there is this arrogance as well at the beginning from the founders, and say, so we have the idea, we have the right answer to a problem, and if clients are not buying, it's not our fault, is because the clients are not the right ones, or better said, as I stated, the customers are stupid, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, and this is something which is drove me crazy at that time.
Yeah,
but
there's a bit of a trigger phrase. I think I've heard, you know, product owners perhaps at all sizes of organizations, you know, use phrases along the lines of, "I know what the customer wants. I don't need to do the research. I don't need to look at the analytics. I know what the users or the customers need to do." And whether there's 10 people or 10,000 people in your organization, that's a sign of trouble. I think.
Yeah, and that's reason why I think there is in SAFe especially a great mechanism for addressing this. So building the right thing, which is actually lean portfolio management. So many people think that SAFe are just adopted and suitable for big organizations, but is in fact not true, right? If we look at the essential SAFe part, and especially on what can be achieved just by adopting definitely the principles and values, but also the practices, also having just a few teams working together. We don't need to have an art up and running. And I'm referring especially to a early stage startup, right? In where you probably have just a couple of teams working together. This doesn't mean that probably you need a release train engineer or you need a articulated product management team, but you definitely can apply all the practices, right? And one of them being lean portfolio management. Now, of course, if you are in a big pharmaceutical group, as I was previous to joining Scaled Agile, you have many operational value stream, dozens of development value streams, and you have a slightly complicated lean portfolio management approach. But the same can help you when you are in a small startup, just deciding on what is the most important things we need to do first, right? So how to prioritize, how to really structure using epics, the initiative we want to start working on. I'm also thinking about this very, very helpful, in my opinion, differentiation between enablers and epics or business epics. If you do this on a portfolio layer, so even before you start working on them, you will also have, especially in a startup environment in which the infrastructure and the architecture at the beginning are probably consuming most of your time because you have nothing, you have to build everything up. So they are pretty good mechanism you can implement. And of course, not having all the complicated structure you might have in a bigger environment, in a big corporation. But the practices are there and you can definitely leverage on that.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess, getting those sorts of practices bedded in relatively early on when you've got maybe only sort of 2 or 3 or 4 teams, some of those technical approaches, getting the architectural runway laid out, getting the some of the technical good practices bedded in, that could save a lot of problems later, can't it? That can mean you don't have to, unbury yourself from all that technical depth that you accumulated when you were, sort of going very fast and sort of trying to get things to market without maybe too much thought about what the next 6 months to 12 months might hold. So yeah, interesting idea, sort of applying scaled agile framework practices, even if you're not quite at scale yet, in anticipation of that future growth. Yeah, interesting.
This is also fostering you in thinking in customer centricity. This is forcing you having epics stated as you already know. So what are the hypotheses? What is the minimum viable product we want to test first, and being sure we are on the right track? But also, I'm thinking also in the lean startup cycle that is not invented by SAFe, but is now part and has been adopted as a critical mechanism, I would say, for the lean portfolio management, but also as a practice in the framework and for all the enterprises adopting it, which is pretty interesting because, of course, we focus on different initiatives. We call them epics. We differentiate between business epics and enabler epics. But then we also do not invest all our efforts in implementing everything. We just focus first on what is the minimum investment we have to do just for proof the hypothesis we are doing is the right one. So, and this is definitely in a startup environment, possibly more critical than in an established environment, because it's all about money as well. You in a startup, you don't have infinite resources, and it's really matter where you are putting your money first. So, and the sooner you can bet some money back, some cash flow, the better it is, because you can then finance further investment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, good. Well, let's move on to the Q&A part now. So as Jess has mentioned in the chat, Jess from our events team is going to be looking after us today. If you have any sort of thoughts on this, if this is sort of resonating with you yourselves as well, the best place to type questions is in the Q&A. So in Zoom, if you sort of have a look at the Q&A thing just next to the chat, if you can't find it, you could use the chat if you want, but then if there's lots of messages flying around, perhaps we might not catch your question. So the best way to make sure that you get your question answered is to put it into the Q&A. So have a little bit of a think. I'll just give you all a few moments to think if you have any questions for me or Michael. How's it looking so far, Jess? Any questions?
Got one question come in that's just asking, what if the founders don't see this as a problem?
Yes. Yes, I get that that's that sort of culture clash issue that we sort of started sort of thinking about. Yeah, if the founder's perfectly happy working 15 hours a day, he thinks that's the way you do business, as far as I'm concerned. Michael, have you ever met a founder with that sort of mindset?
I would say almost everywhere. Also because the motivation is different. We can also talk about the different approaches you might have in a startup. That's the reason why in most of the cases you see normal employees also participating in the revenues, or having as the revenues at the beginning are not there, just receiving some stocks, right? Is an additional motivation. But I have to say, especially when the startup is growing, is also kind of, you were mentioning there are particular roles we have, not just in SAFe, but also in every agile approach. We are talking about product owners, we are talking about scrum masters. It's also connected with this idea. So the founder is doing everything, right? And is not delegating, or at least making the decision process very, very difficult. So this is something you need to address. You need to establish these roles, especially looking into product owners. So who is going to take care about the product? And you need to pay attention to what I call the segregation of powers, right? So you have to move from the one who founded the company is doing everything and is deciding on everything. You need to have this distributed and following the agile principles and the SAFe, lean agile principles. You need to have these 3 dimensions. So you need to have somebody who is looking for the product. So what needs to be done, why the customer will, let's say, adopt this version of the product and not another one. So customer centricity is the keyword here. You need also to have somebody who is taking care of the technical part. So how we are going to implement that product, right? And you might have these people within the teams, or if you are growing in SAFe, we know there is the role of the system architect, right? So somebody who is taking care on establishing guidance and some of the practices, so that not every team is just reinventing the wheel, right? And the third one is Scrum Master or release train engineer, who are going to take care about the organizational part, right? Because it's not just about building new products. It's not just about building new features and delivering this feature to who is consuming our work. It's not just about technology. It's also how we are organized, right? How we are able to establishing this flow of value. So because it's of course related to some technology that needs to be in place, keyword DevOps, continuous delivery pipeline, etc. But you need also not just to have the right people, you have to have these people organized in the right way, right? And that's because it's important to come away from this centricity, if you want. So the founders are deciding on everything and are doing everything, which is probably working in an early stage, to these segregation of power. So establishing the different layers, if you want, depending on how many people you have in your organization. So if you have just a few people, maybe a few agile teams, if you're growing. So the first agile restrain. So just having a look into the organizational aspect as well.
Yeah, interesting. I guess sometimes in if you're doing change, if you're sort of helping organizations to change, there's some of the basics you can sort of fall back on, i.e. sort of painting a picture about what would happen if you don't change. You know, if you want to convince the founder to listen to you and to sort of go down this route, you can sort of, you know, sort of say, well, what do you think is going to happen if we carry on like this? If you're making all the decisions, how would you feel if you were on the team? If you were you were hired to be maybe a product manager or a product owner or somebody making decisions about this or that, would you stick around? Maybe, and what kind of person would stick around? Is it the sort of person that you want in your organization? So sort of painting a bit of a picture about what might happen if things carry on this way sometimes.
I think it's also part of the strategy. What is the strategy? Strategy is building something and then sell it in 2 years or 3 years time, or even is sometimes dangerous to have the very first months or couple of years very, very successful,
Yes.
but not probably successful because of the product or because of you have a clear mission and vision. It's just because you covered a need that nobody is covering. So you need to be able also to protect what you created and to invest in the mission and invest in the product in the proper way, right?
Yeah. I think at any stage in an organization, success can sometimes breed complacency. Things are fine. Why would we change?
Exactly.
That can be dangerous. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Any more questions in the Q&A, Jess?
Yes, we've got one that's just come in from Brian, and he has asked, how can you stop the founders going directly to the team members and bypassing the product structure?
Yes, interesting. So if we sort of put a bit of structure in place, we've set up, the sort of core events, and we've delegated, convinced the founders to delegate some of their responsibility. But then Tuesday afternoon, they go straight down to the team and say, "Oh, I've just had this idea. Just have a look at this." How can you mitigate that?
That's interesting, because I have a slightly different view on this. I mean, of course, we do not accept now the founders going directly to the team and saying, so you now need to focus on this and forget about the other stuff. That's definitely not good. But I would foster all the time, especially when the organization is growing, that this communication or this coming together between the ones that are establishing the strategy and are closer to the business with the ones that are probably not that closer and have to understand why we are doing things we are doing, right? So where is the context? Where is the intent behind this? And of course, also from the founders, they need to also to see where the teams are working in, or what are the particular problems they are facing in their team or within the arts. And I'm always thinking about the business owners we have in the SAFE construct representing the business, which is, if you want, kind of, representing the founders as well, if we are talking about a small companies or small art. So, as I said, on the one side, definitely respect the flow of value. So respect the mechanism, respect the way we are going to prioritize stuff, but also not take away this direct communication in terms of giving feedback, gather feedback, Gemba or go see, as we say. So know the environment the teams are working in, but also for the teams knowing the business better and knowing what all the nuances are and the issues business is facing. So I think this is crucial.
That's a good point, because sometimes they might actually be onto something. They might actually be right. So I remember years and years ago, I worked for an online fashion retailer, and I was working for a team, and we had a bit of a program of work that was sort of going on, and we got a completely out of the blue, just do it type initiative. So I think it was to add in Instagram functionality. The CEO just looked at some of the trends on the message boards and the forums and what's going on social media. And he just had a hunch. He just sort of essentially knew that the right thing for the product right then was to put that on hold and to spend just 3 or 4 weeks, I think it just took to really integrate that sort of functionality. And you know what, he was right. It actually turned out to be a good idea. But I guess maybe one of the things to do is to put a bit of structure around that, so that if it happens, being able to respond to unplanned work effectively, but also understanding the opportunity costs and the disruption, and maybe talking a bit about, well, if this happens all the time, we're going to get substantially less productivity, and maybe having some metrics around that. So seeing the effect, understanding the effect of those JDI sort of things that might sort of come down, but not being maybe not too religious or dogmatic about it. No, the CEO must never interfere, but knowing the effect of it, and if it becomes a problematic pattern, being able to deal with that as well. So
yeah, it's also educating the founders. Just we have a moment in which we are planning together and we need your feedback, which is called PI planning. We have a moment in which we are just showing you what we are doing, which is called a system demo, right? So there are mechanisms also for fostering this. Yeah. But again, I'm also sorry, a friend of is not black and white. So every situation has to be analyzed and see what can we actually or how we can make the best out of it. So definitely with you.
Good stuff. Good. So we're kind of leading on to the next topic, really. So let's have a bit of a look at kind of a basic pattern in challenging the creative energy. We've talked a little bit about some of these ideas already, in fact. So that'll sort of lead us on to the solution to these challenges and these problems. You start with this idea that I've got another idea, some bright spark somewhere in the organization, maybe the founder, maybe somebody else has this great idea. And there's a pattern which has been around actually long before Agile, long before sort of things were done, whereby there's always a bit of work to do to make a plan. Then there's got to be some work to execute that plan, and then you've got to check. And the basic structure of making a plan, having some sort of structure, some sort of way of doing it, some sort of process to say, right, okay, there is this idea. Let's pause, let's stop, let's gather together to investigate this plan, to think carefully about what it's going to be, to maybe get into the detail, to make sure that we're all aligned, that we all agree what we want to do. Then there's the execution and the coordination, and in a scaled environment, there's that need to maintain situational awareness and understand what's going on. But essentially, there's the time in the sort of work structure where the work has to be done, and the work has to be produced. And then there's a time for review. We built it. Did it work? Did it not work? Let's assess that. Let's validate that. Let's sort of investigate what we did. And this cycle takes place on a daily basis with sort of daily stand-ups. It takes place on a weekly or bi-weekly basis if you're sort of planning iterations or sprints. And as you say, it takes place on a PI planning basis. But I think that pattern of making a plan, executing and coordinating, and then reviewing is one of the real sort of keys to success in making Agile work and scaled Agile work effectively. Just channeling that creative energy through a little bit of a cycle, a little bit of a process like this at all sorts of different levels, at all sorts of different scales. And as a solution to the challenges that we just sort of saw, different people wanting to go in different directions and potentially do different things, just really going back to basics, applying that sort of cyclical nature, that sort of sort of plan, execute, review pattern. I think this is a solution to most of the problems that we might see. What are your thoughts on that, Michael? How does that resonate with your experience?
So also here, I would say there are three aspects or three keywords for me. So the ones is the most evident, if you want, what you were also mentioning is the cadence, right? So we have a given cadence. And it doesn't matter if we have a couple of teams working as a Scrum teams and we decide on a 2 weeks iteration, or if we are very ambitious, we do 1 week iteration. And if we introduce more teams, probably we will scale up and we will have just not just the iteration, so not just team level or the teams iterating with a given cadence, but we will have this team of teams, the art, with so-called PIs. PIs have seen also in the startup probably being at the beginning a little bit shorter so that you can react much quicker. And this is the first aspect. The second aspect is also related with this one is the ability to scale, right? Because it's not the same to plan, execute, and review on a team level than if you have more than one team. So you need to introduce additional mechanism, right? So in SAFe, we have these differentiation. So even if we are doing almost the same, but it's not the same having one team doing iteration planning and having one art doing PI planning. There are two different mechanisms on two different levels. focusing on the same. So how we can be predictable, how we can be aligned on the value we want to achieve in the next time box, but they are just different mechanisms, right? And the third one, which I think is a little bit more tricky, and especially startup needs to be very careful about, is the review. So it worked. What does it mean, actually? It worked because the founders is happy. It worked because the definition of done are done, or it worked because somewhere in the market somebody's using it and we get money for that. This is the first aspect. And the second is also, it's pretty easy to measure quality when we are a piece of software or a piece of hardware in front of us. But what we are doing is service. So how you measure the quality of, I don't know, a new process? Of course, you have some metrics, but it's very difficult to put that metrics in place and being sure that are relevant metrics and not something that you probably could be proud of, but they are not really measuring the success. So-called vanity metrics, right? So I think especially in a startup environment, these questions around how we are going to measure quality first, and when are we really done, and when are we able to say, this is working and we can rely on this, and we can probably, if we're talking about a minimum viable product, we can probably build on top of this. So these are pretty critical points, in my opinion, and in my experience, you need to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I think all three of these stages, you can do them well or you can do them badly. I think getting the right buy-in for a review, and then also having the right data, the right metrics, selecting the right metrics in the first place. These are all indicators of whether this will work or not. So you can follow a PI planning cycle. You can sort of great, effort and expense and sort of time. You can sort of spend several days making the plans, all the energy that goes into it, into the preparation, the sort of the event itself. If there's no review at the end, if the review is maybe done in isolation, if it's just the engineers that are doing it, if there's no real engagement with the business, with the stakeholders, or if, as you say, you're sort of picking vanity metrics, it's a huge missed opportunity. I think of all the events in Agile, that review is probably the most neglected, whether at a PI scale or even just at an iteration scale. The opportunity that you get by shortening those cycles, by not having a waterfall style where you do all the analysis, all the development, all the testing, which is actually quite efficient in some ways. It means you can do resource smoothing, and utilization tends to be quite good in sort of waterfall. If you've gone to the trouble to get into an iterative cycle where there's a bit of sort of cross functionality going on, people are working on slightly different things that maybe aren't to their strength, that's it takes a bit of a performance hit in doing so. It's not necessarily the most efficient way of building a fixed set of known results. The reason you do it, the payoff you get, is that opportunity to, every couple of weeks or every couple of months, to stop, to look around, to look up, to get some feedback, to say, is it still the right thing? Is it still the right idea? And if you're skipping that, if you're not taking that opportunity, it's effectively a waste of money. So we're spending all that time, all that effort to get the opportunity to be able to adjust and to go in a different direction. If you're not capitalizing on that, then it's a big opportunity cost that you've sort of lost there.
Definitely. And I see also very important, not just for bigger organization, but also for startups. So having this or very clear where we want to go. So what is also the baseline we have today? And this is depending on the stage we are in, but it's also evolving over time. And being really able to, at the given time after iteration or PIs, to sit down and looking into what we have done and really say, so are we still on the right track? So I remember one of my CIO in my previous employer said, so actually every road looks good and looks pretty well. So, but we need to understand, and in this case, our founders in the startup needs to understand and to communicate, where do we want to go? Do we want to go to Paris, or do we want to go to Rome, right? Because this is important, and having the right way means the cadence, means the baseline settled, means the way we are going to measure if we are on the right track are crucial, right? Are crucial because only these we can assure that we are building the right stuff and we are concentrating and we are able to deliver the right stuff, solving the right problems to the right customers.
Absolutely, that's what it's all about. Good. Okay, maybe we can go back to the Q&A then. So what does everybody else think about these ideas? Any questions, any problems that you're working on in this sort of space? Once again, open up the Q&A. Lots of opportunity. Me and Michael are very happy to delve into any specific problems that you might have or any issues that you might be seeing in the field right now.
Or also if you just want to share your experience.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
We have one question that's asking, what if people can't agree on the idea to work on?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. Yeah. I think.
Could you repeat the question? I didn't get it.
Sorry, they're asking, what if people can't agree on the idea to work on?
Yeah, so as presented here, so making a plan, I've got another idea. What if actually there's 2 or 3 other people that also have an idea and they think that's the thing that should be worked on? So I guess preparing for PI planning or preparing for that sort of plan making is crucial for that going well. I think you pretty much got to have a fairly clear idea coming into PI planning or coming into any sort of planning cycle like that, what that idea might be. And then it becomes a classic sort of stakeholder management piece, having people with accountabilities, having people like product managers who sort of link in with the strategic objectives of an organization. If there's a debate to be had, I think one crucial thing is not leaving any big decisions until the day itself, especially if there's senior stakeholders and people with a lot of influence, a lot of power. If you're having that debate right there and then, as you're trying to plan in the whole thing, you're probably lining yourself up for a pretty difficult couple of days. So trying to have an awareness of those sorts of things, try to sort of deal with those sort of questions with a few weeks notice, ideally, that can often help. What are your thoughts, Michael?
I think there are also quite a few mechanisms for assuring this, and possibly, apart from the most visible one, in which we say, okay, in SAFE, we have what we call continuous exploration. So we have our product management investigating, getting data from the market, focusing on personas, even if personas probably at the beginning of the startup is also quite difficult to work with or to really find the right ones. Is more guessing than building up real personas. But apart from that, I think the refinement process we have also in SAFE is a very powerful tool, because what we want at the end is assuring we have different perspective looking into this one idea and also comparing with all the others, right? I truly believe that the wisdom of the crowd is at the end what is really matter. And we need just to establish this mechanism. So how we can make sure many people with different perspectives and different backgrounds and different experience can look into these ideas and deciding together. So this is actually the most relevant one. Let's start with this one. And I think the refinement, and then you have organization that needs to establish given events for that. So refinement Fridays or refinement sessions or refinement meeting or whatever, or other organizations just embedded these practices in their daily work. So it's kind of continuous refinement, if you want, but it's critical, and more critical when the organization is growing. So who are the right people to sit in these refinement sessions, right? So as we have hundreds of people, so how we make sure that we have the right ones sitting in the same room and discussing around this. So I think the refinement session, and then we can talk about all the mechanism we have in SAFE. So weighted shorter job first for prioritizing think the features themselves. So how we can derive from an epic, so features that then are let's say contributing or describing what needs to be done. And all these process is just refining. It's just refining from the very first idea our founders might have, or product management, or both of them, and having all these great ideas just competing to each other and making a little bit different. So there is not just I'm competing with my idea with you. So it's not a fight, is how we can assure that for the organization we are in and we are leading together, we are just tackling the right stuff, right? And I think this is also pretty much, and definitely less in startups, but more in big organization, the way you are also organizing your teams, but better said, the way you are rewarding the teams, right? If you put personal goals, so you will always have people fighting for their own ideas. If you change it and you make the team is the most important, or even the entire organization, that's the goal we want to achieve, and everybody will be rewarded based on the global or on the team achievements. This is going also to change behaviors, right? So I think these are the two components that you need to keep an eye on. So having the mechanism, but also have the right structure in terms of HR to supporting that mechanism.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it. I think that is like having a system, having an approach, whether it's about discovery in the first place, using tools and techniques like personas that maybe are fed into with customer interviews or research or marketing, sort of customer research, or sort of in that sort of way. I think discovery is maybe a sort of slightly neglected part of products. Where do the ideas come from in the first place? There's a whole load of stuff that you can do to generate high quality ideas that are more likely than others to be relevant and to succeed. And then, as you say, having a bit of a process around prioritization and evaluation, which ensures the job first, or other sort of similar techniques. It takes the sting out of that stakeholder conversation, doesn't it? If rather than saying, I'm rejecting your idea, you say, we fed your idea through this process, and here are the criteria that we're using, and here's where it's ended up in the backlog. It's not this time, but maybe we'll consider it for later. You're pointing at the chart, or you're pointing at the board, rather than pointing at the person. That's can sometimes make that conversation.
Yes, definitely. That's a very good point as well.
Good stuff. Any more questions, Jess, in the Q&A?
Yeah, we have another one asking, how can you tell if it's worked? What can you do to verify it? How can you tell if it's worked?
Yeah, Michael, I think you were talking a bit about that at the start. We get to the review, it works. Well, that's a bold claim, isn't it? What criteria might we sort of set in advance? Maybe in the making a plan phase. We've sort of made a plan. I guess we need to know, how will we tell? How will we know if it works? Maybe set those criteria before we begin. What kind of techniques might we use for that?
Yeah, I mean, also here there are plenty of mechanisms. I think that the three most relevant here are, of course, you will have within your features, but also within your user stories, given acceptance criteria. So this is going to be the first check if you want. And also here, you need to invest time in refining what we were saying before, because you need to have relevant acceptance criteria. You need these acceptance criteria being measurable. You need to make sure that if you achieve these acceptance criteria, you are also on the right track on the mission you have. Secondly, and not less important, you also have non-functional requirements, right? That they are pretty important, not directly related to a single work item, but definitely to be considered, right? So if you are delivering the right feature, but it's not respecting, I don't know, the security part of your system, or security policy, or if possibly it's not respecting the response time, you might have an issue, right? So, and these need also to be considered from the very beginning. And then I think that possibly the most powerful one, and is definitely again a social exercise, is about the definition of done. So when are we all agreeing that this work is done? Is when we are done, when the founders is happy, when the client is happy and using it, which is might defer our velocity or might bring us in a different perspective. So this is also, and not just in startup, but also other organizations, this is one of my first questions when I enter the organization. So how do your definition of done looks like, right? Because there you can also measure the level of quality you have to expect. And it doesn't matter if you're producing hardware or software or a combination or services. So you need to focus on when we agreed that this is finished, right? When we agreed that it can be released, but also when we agreed when it can be pulled from the next step, right? So thinking about policies, if we have a Kanban in place on a team level, but also in portfolio layers. So the question is also, what are the policies we are using, right? What is in there? And this is helping definitely to not just to prioritize, not just to understand when is finished and when is not, but it's also keeping us aligned. So I think all these mechanisms are also in place just for assuring this alignment. And in this case, alignment around is finished. Did we reach the value we wanted to reach? The person or the people that are consuming this work are happy with that. And this is also connected directly with, do we have a clear idea about who is consuming our work, which is definitely the first question we need to address, right? Because possibly it's not the founders, is the user, is the client, is the customers out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one subtlety of sort of PI planning reviews that I always quite liked was the fact that rather than many sort of agile frameworks which measure, completed work, work done, as it were, sort of work that meets the definition of done, the recommended approach in PI planning is to measure instead business value, which is connected to the work that got delivered, but it's not a direct count of story points or features delivered or things like that. It's a measure of what value was actually delivered. I think how you assess that is probably quite key. If you're assessing the business value delivered, what does it relate to? It relates to things that have actually been released and maybe been made available, and then maybe it relates to specific, business specific metrics, maybe like average order size or conversion rates or net promoter score, or whatever sector you're in, whatever sort of type of products you're building. There's probably some sort of more outcome-based metrics rather than output-based metrics, which are more telling to answer questions like, did it work? Was it worth doing? But absolutely, as you say, sort of getting to done, getting it in front of customers, unless it's in front of a customer or being used in however it was intended to be used, you're certainly never going to get anywhere near assessing whether it did the job, whether it sort of met the even whether it met the criteria or not, but whether it delivered the value that you're hoping to deliver.
Yes, you were touching also a very relevant mechanism, which has also different perspectives. So because PI objectives are first there just for the teams committing on the outcomes and not on the outputs. So no teams in this world would commit on a bunch of stories split it over the next few iterations, so within a PI, but they can definitely commit on outcomes, and PI objectives are the quintessence of the outcomes we want to achieve. But also they are pretty precise, because imagine I'm giving always this example when I teach and also do coaching. So PI objectives are at the end different than features, because if you want to organize a great birthday party, right? You will have probably a bunch of features telling you, you need to book a venue, you need to select a menu for the people joining with good stuff or good food. You need probably to sit down and think about the list of people you want to invite, but you will never find, or just indirectly, that we are going to organize a birthday party, possibly as part of the vision and the mission, but you will not find all or these reference in the features. What you will have at the end is a team or a specific art saying the PI objective for us, for these PIs, is going to have at the end a great birthday party, right? And this is the difference between having outcomes measured and outputs measured, because you could have also all the features implemented, but the birthday party wasn't that great, right? In the same way, you are using PI objectives just for aligning also expectations and focusing more on the outcomes and less on the outputs, is also a very good instrument to being sure at the end that what we do, what we build, is just for delivering value and is not just delivering features. It's not just completing user stories and being happy in closing an iteration, right?
Yeah.
And it's important also to know, and this is also a debate I had a few times, is the business owners who is then accepting or let's say evaluating these these PI objectives with giving you actual business value or business value when you're in PI planning, because he is a representation of the ones that are consuming the work. It could be the person who is consuming the work, definitely, but it could also be in many cases just a representative of that, right? And so him giving the actual business value and really telling you, yes, this what you did will deliver or has delivered that value. I mean, you have to be careful. Is this really representative of the ones that are really consuming the work or not? And this is an aspect which is intrinsic in the PI objectives, but not always this question is answered, right? So we have this mechanism in place. We also are focusing on delivering outcomes and not outputs, which is good. But we also need to be sure that the person who is then taking these PI objectives as achieved is also close to the ones that are consuming that work, and not it's just far away and it's just his opinion.
Absolutely. Good. Okay. Well, our time is drawing fairly short. Jess, do we have any more questions in the Q&A?
No, that's all the questions that have come through.
Great. Okay. Well, we've just got a couple of minutes to go, but well, I think that was a good session. So thank you very much, Michael, for joining us. After this, feedback is always good for these free sessions. So after this session, you should expect to receive a short email with a survey based on to give a bit of feedback from what you heard here today, and any further questions that you might have. That will just be interesting as well. But thanks once again, Michael, for your time today, and thanks to those that have joined us. I hope you all found it useful. And there is a part 2 for this session, which you can also find on our website. So stay tuned for that. It'd be good to see where we can go from here. So thanks once again, and everybody has a good day.
Also from my side, thank you to the attendees. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Jess. And thank you, Agility IM, for inviting me.
Great stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.